In the dizzying world of Tokyo politics, one man has become the most important person in Japan, almost overnight. His name is Yuichiro Tamaki, and he leads a party so small it's usually just a footnote. But right now he finds himself at the center of a bizarre political tug-of-war. On one side, you have Sana Takaichi.
Yeah.
She just won the leadership of the ruling party, a victory that should have been a golden ticket to the prime minister's office. Instead, she's finding the prize just out of reach, forced to desperately court Tamaki to secure enough votes to actually govern.
It's quite the predicament.
And then on the other side is Yoshihiko Noda, a former prime minister, still haunted by his own government's collapse over a decade ago.
Yes, Noda, determined.
He's so determined to see his old rivals fall that he's making Tamaki an unbelievable offer. Join the opposition, and we'll make you the prime minister instead.
It's an incredible offer, really. Unprecedented in some ways.
So you have one man holding only a handful of seats being offered the leadership of the world's fourth largest economy by both sides.
By both sides. It's extraordinary leverage.
This isn't just a political negotiation. It's a high-stakes gamble that could decide Japan's entire future.
Okay, let's really get into this because it's turned Japanese politics completely on its head. For so long, we just assumed, LDP dominance, stability.
Predictability, almost. The LDP-Komeito coalition was just the background radiation of Japanese politics for 26 years?
Exactly. It felt like the bedrock, but now that bedrock has just crumbled, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, less than a week after Takaichi wins the LDP leadership race, which should have been, the straightforward path to becoming PM Komeito, just walks away.
And the official reason at least, was the LDP's handling of those political funding scandals.
That's the stated reason, yes. The weak response, as they put it. It points directly to that massive slush fund issue involving the Abe and Nikai faction.
Maybe 600 million figure, right? That's a staggering amount of unreported money. It's huge, nearly $4 million US. And for Komeito, a party that prides itself on its clean image, tracing its roots back to Soka, well, aligning with an LDP perceived as soft on this kind of thing became untenable.
Especially given their history. Wasn't Komeito partly formed against LDP corruption back in the day?
Precisely. That was part of their identity, their raison d'etre, when they first emerged significantly in the 90s. So this scandal and the LDP's response, it wasn't just politics. It felt like a betrayal of the core premise of their long-standing coalition. They couldn't stomach it.
So this split wasn't just a minor disagreement. It created this power vacuum.
Completely. Analysts are calling it an entirely new and uncertain situation. Suddenly, no single party, no traditional bloc, has a guaranteed majority in either house of the Diet.
Which means Takaichi, despite winning her party's leadership, is stuck. She needs partners.
She desperately needs partners. Without Komeito's 24 seats in the lower house, the LDP is well short of the 233 needed for a majority. Her path to actually becoming prime minister is suddenly diminished, as the reports say. Very diminished.
And this is where Yuichiro Tamaki, leader of the Democratic Party for the People, the DPP, suddenly becomes the most popular person in Nagatacho.
The ultimate kingmaker. His relatively small centrist party holds the absolute balance of power. He gets to decide, essentially, whether Takaichi and the LDP stay in government or if there's a chance, however slim, for the opposition.
Okay, let's dig into that LDP scramble first. Takaichi knows she's short votes. So job one is finding a new dance partner.
Absolutely. And she moved incredibly fast. Almost immediately after the Komeito split, she's meeting with Tamaki.
What's her pitch? Is she offering major policy concessions?
Not exactly. Her approach seems to be more about emphasizing the existing common ground. She's stressing how similar the LDP and DPP already are on the big stuff.
Like what specifically?
Well, the core issues. Diplomacy, national security, that's a big one, energy policy, and the basic direction of the economy. She's basically saying, look, we already agree on the fundamentals. You're a natural fit for us.
Kind of framing the DPP as LDP light, almost. Or at least much closer to the LDP than to the main opposition.
Exactly. Positioning them as the sensible, conservative-leaning alternative partner, contrasting them sharply with the more liberal Constitutional Democratic Party, the CDP. The LDP leadership is pushing hard for this cooperation, not just with the DPP, but also trying to loop in the Japan Innovation Party, the JAP.
Another smaller, generally conservative-ish party.
All right, you're trying to patch together a new majority coalition, maybe LDP, DPP, JAP. It would be less stable than the old LDP Komeito setup, but it might just be enough to govern.
So Takaichi's offering partnership, stability.
Yeah.
Basically a seat at the ruling table. But the opposition, They saw this LDP weakness and decided to go big.
Oh, absolutely. The CDP, the largest opposition party, immediately saw this as their moment. A once-in-a-decade chance for a change of government, as they termed it. Their move was audacious.
Led by Yoshihiko Noda, the former PM. He seems particularly motivated here.
He really does. Noda carries the scars of his own government's collapse back in 2012. He has a deep-seated rivalry with the LDP and, well, he wasn't subtle. He made the headline-grabbing offer.
Which was?
He publicly floated the idea of Yuichiro Tamaki again, the leader of the much smaller DPP, as the unified opposition candidate for prime minister.
Wow. Okay, so the biggest opposition party is saying, we'll back your guy for the top job if you join us to kick the LDP out.
That's the essence of it. It's pure strategic calculation. They know they probably can't win the premiership themselves right now, but maybe, just maybe, they can unite the non-LDP forces behind Tamaki.
Does the math even work, though? Can the CDP, JIP, and DPP combined actually outvote the LDP?
Yes, that's the crucial part. If those three parties were to band together, their total number of seats in the legislature would actually exceed the LDP's total. The LDP is still the biggest single party, but potentially outnumbered by a unified front.
And what about Komeito in all this? They left the LDP, but are they jumping into bed with the opposition?
Not automatically, no. But crucially, their leader has stated they wouldn't necessarily rule out supporting an opposition candidate for PM. They're keeping their options open.
So they could potentially abstain or even vote for Tamaki if he looked like a credible, stable choice.
It's a possibility. It adds another layer of leverage for Tamaki. He's got the LDP desperately courting him, the main opposition offering him the premiership, and the former LDP partner potentially willing to back him under the right circumstances. It's an extraordinary position for the leader of such a small party.
Okay, so Tamaki has these two incredible offers on the table. Partnership with the LDP or the actual prime minister's office via the opposition. Logically, you'd think he'd leap at the chance to be PM, but it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. And this is where we run headfirst into the brick wall of policy differences, particularly between Tamaki's DPP and Noda's CDP.
Tamaki himself has been pretty blunt about this, hasn't he?
Extremely blunt. He's come out saying things like, "We will never bend our core policies merely to pursue the prime minister's post." He's signaling that power isn't worth it if it means compromising on fundamental principles.
He seems genuinely wary of the CDP's pressure to make concessions. He keeps talking about deep policy divisions.
Yes, and he's not wrong. These aren't minor quibbles. They are fundamental disagreements on the direction of the country. Let's start with the biggest one, national security.
Right, this is always a fault line in Japanese politics.
Yeah.
Where do the DPP and CDP stand?
Tamaki has made it crystal clear. Security policy is non-negotiable. He calls it one of the nation's core principles. His party, the DPP, aligns with the LDP and the GIP in supporting the current interpretation of the Constitution that allows for the right of collective self-defense.
Which allows Japan's military, the self-defense forces, to aid an ally under attack.
Correct. It's seen by conservatives and centrists as a necessary measure in the current regional security environment. Think China, North Korea.
And the CDP. Where are they on this? Still sticking to a more pacifist interpretation of Article 9?
Very much so. The CDP's official stance calls for abolishing the unconstitutional parts of the security legislation passed under Abe. They want to roll back collective self-defense, returning to a more strictly defensive posture.
That's a huge gap. A fundamental disagreement on national defense.
It's massive. Tamaki basically told the CDP, you guys need to revise your policies to face reality. He's putting the onus entirely on them to change, saying the DPP won't budge on something this critical.
So defense alone looks like a deal breaker.
Yeah.
But you mentioned other areas too. Energy policy.
Yes, energy is another major sticking point. Tamaki has specifically cited the CDP's very strong opposition to building any new nuclear power plants.
This still stems from the Fukushima disaster back in 2011.
Largely, yes. The disaster occurred under a government led by the DPJ, the predecessor to the CDP, and the political trauma runs deep. The CDP remains staunchly anti-nuclear.
But Tamaki and the DP, like the LDP, see nuclear as necessary for energy security.
Exactly. Especially now, with volatile global energy prices and the push for decarbonization. The DPP, LDP, and JIP generally view restarting existing reactors and even building new ones as essential for a stable, low-carbon energy supply for Japan's industrial economy. Tamaki sees the CDP's stance as unrealistic and potentially damaging.
Okay, so security is a chasm. Energy is a major disagreement. What's the third big one?
Constitutional revision, the perennial ideological battleground.
Where do they stand here?
Again, polar opposites. The DPP and JIP are actually quite proactive on wanting to revise the Constitution, arguably even more vocal than the LDP has been lately. They want to clarify the status of the self-defense forces in Article 9, maybe look at other reforms too.
And the CDP.
The CDP is very passive on revision, if not actively opposed. They often align with the Japanese Communist Party in resisting any changes to the post-war constitution. It symbolizes that deep ideological divide between the conservative centrist bloc and the liberal left bloc.
So on the three really big pillars, security, energy, the Constitution itself, Tamaki's DPP looks much more like the LDP than the CDP.
The policy alignment is stark, which makes you wonder how the CDP thought their offer could even work. They did propose a kind of workaround, didn't they? The mission-type cabinet.
Right, what was that about? An attempt to paper over the cracks?
Essentially, yes. The idea was, let's form a government together, Tamaki as PM, but let's agree not to tackle the big controversial issues like security or the Constitution right away. Let's focus on a few specific agreed-upon missions, maybe economic stimulus or disaster recovery, something less divisive.
A temporary alliance of convenience, basically. Kick the hard questions down the road.
Exactly. A way to grab power now and hope they could manage the policy conflicts later.
How did Tamaki react to that proposal?
He was reportedly quite cold towards it. His response was something like, if we cannot agree on basic national policies, such a government will collapse.
He clearly doesn't buy it. He thinks it's doomed to fail.
It seems so. He appears convinced that without a fundamental agreement on core principles, any such coalition would be inherently unstable and would likely fall apart quickly, possibly doing more damage to the opposition's credibility in the long run. For him, policy substance comes before the allure of the top job.
Tamaki's fear that a government built on shaky policy foundations will just collapse. That's not just hypothetical, is it? There's a lot of history there, looking back at attempts to break the LDP's grip.
Oh, absolutely. His caution is deeply rooted in Japan's post-war political experience, particularly everything that happened after the original 1955 system started to fray.
Let's unpack that 1955 system. What was it and why is it relevant now? Some people are even talking about a neo-1955 system emerging.
Right. The original 1955 system refers to the period from, 1955 up to 1993, when the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, basically held uninterrupted power. It was formed by the merger of two conservative parties specifically to counter the growing strength of the Japan Socialist Party, the JSP.
And the GSP was the main opposition back then.
Yes, but they were never really seen as a credible alternative government by a majority of the public. And that's the key to why the LDP stayed in power for so long, despite various scandals.
Why weren't the socialists seen as credible? What was the issue?
It largely came down to their core ideology, especially on foreign policy and defense. The JSP often advocated for positions like unarmed neutrality.
Meaning Japan should have no military and rely solely on diplomacy.
Essentially, yes. Or drastically scale back the U.S.-Japan security alliance. In the context of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union nearby, China, the Korean War, these positions just seemed unrealistic, even dangerous to many Japanese voters.
So the JSP's own platform, particularly on security, made them look unelectable.
It made them look incapable of actually governing and protecting the country. Their stance was seen as dogmatic. So voters often held their noses and stuck with the LDP, seeing them as the only realistic option for security and stability, even if they disliked the LDP's corruption or arrogance. The opposition effectively marginalized itself on the key issue of national security.
The LDP won by default, in a way.
In many ways, yes. The structure of the political debate benefited them. That system only really broke temporarily in 2009.
With the Democratic Party of Japan, the DPJ, winning that landslide election, how did they manage it when the JSP couldn't?
The DPJ succeeded because they managed to build a broad coalition united around the themes of change and reform, focusing more on domestic issues, bureaucratic reform, and ending LDP entitlement. They temporarily managed to sidestep the really divisive ideological fights over the Constitution and security that had always tripped up the JSP.
But that DPJ government didn't last long either, did it?
No, it collapsed after about 3 years due to a mix of internal divisions, policy missteps handling the Fukushima crisis, for instance, and, frankly, perceived incompetence in governing. And after that failure, Japanese politics seemed to snap back towards that older pattern.
Which brings us to this idea of a neo-1955 system.
Exactly. The idea is that the fundamental axis of political conflict has reverted back to that old ideological divide, conservative versus progressive, particularly focused on the Constitution, national security, and maybe energy now, too.
And the argument is, when the fight is framed that way, conservative parties just have an inherent advantage.
That seems to be the dynamic. Parties like the LDP and now also the DPP and GIP, which take a more realistic or status quo stance on defense and security, tend to resonate more with voter concerns about stability in a volatile region.
So a more liberal party like the CDP finds itself fighting multiple battles.
Yeah. Precisely. They're fighting the LDP, obviously, but they're also fighting the conservative-leaning opposition parties like DPP and JIP, who often agree more with the LDP on these core issues. And third, they're fighting against that public inclination towards security and stability, which often overrides desires for other kinds of change.
So structurally, even if the LDP loses its majority, the easiest path back to stability often involves the LDP just co-opting those smaller conservative parties like the DPP.
That's the underlying structural bias, yes. It makes forming a stable non-LDP government incredibly difficult, especially one led by a party perceived as being on the liberal side of that core ideological divide. History bears this out.
You mentioned the 1993 Hosokawa government earlier. That was the first non-LDP government since 1955, right? It didn't last long either.
It lasted less than a year. It was a coalition of multiple parties, united only by their opposition to the LDP, but riven by policy differences and power struggles. Its collapse reinforced this idea that anti-LDP coalitions are inherently fragile.
And there's some interesting academic work, a game theory model, looking at why these coalitions succeed or fail. That seems really relevant to Tamaki's current dilemma.
Yes, that analysis is fascinating and speaks directly to the dynamics we're seeing now. It looked at coalition formation as a dynamic game, trying to figure out what makes a coalition stable over time.
What were the key factors in the model?
Two things really stood out. First, which party takes the initiative in negotiations, and second, something called the cost for negotiation, usually represented as C.
Okay, initiative seems straightforward. Who makes the first move? Who's driving the bus?
Right. Is it the LDP reaching out first, setting the agenda, or is it an opposition party like the CDP making this offer to Tamaki, trying to seize the initiative?
And the cost for negotiation, C. What does that represent in real political terms? Like, how hard is it for a party to walk away from one offer and try to build something else?
Think of C as the political friction, the difficulty involved in rejecting a deal and starting over. A high C means it's painful to reject an offer. Maybe it causes huge internal party splits, takes weeks of negotiation, risks public backlash. A low C means walking away and joining a different potential coalition is relatively easy, low risk.
Got it. So if the cost is low, parties can easily flip between potential partners. If it's high, they're more likely to stick with the first decent offer they get.
That's the idea. Now, what the game theory model found, looking back at 1993 and other periods, was really telling.
What did it show?
It showed that when the LDP took the initiative, which it usually does, being the biggest party, the stable outcome was almost always a coalition that included the LDP. They act as an anchor, they have the resources, the established position. It's the path of least resistance.
That makes sense. So Takachi reaching out to Tamaki immediately is the strategically sound move for the LDP, trying to lock in that initiative.
Definitely. But what about forming an anti-LDP government, like the one Noda is proposing with Tamaki as PM? When can that become stable, according to the model?
Good question. Did the model show a path for that?
Yes, but only under very specific, quite fragile conditions. First, a minor party like the DPP now, or like the small Seike, GAIC, or JNP parties back in '93, has to successfully seize and maintain the negotiating initiative away from the LDP. They have to be the ones driving the formation process.
That already sounds difficult, going up against the LDP machine. What was the second condition that involved that cost C, right?
Exactly. The cost of negotiation C had to be in a kind of Goldilocks zone, not too high, not too low, but just right, in a specific middle range.
Why the middle range? What happens if C is too high or too low for an anti-LDP coalition?
If C is too high, negotiations just bog down. The anti-LDP parties can't overcome their differences easily, the process stalls, and the LDP can often just wait them out or pick off defectors. But if C is too low, meaning it's really easy for parties to reject the anti-LDP proposal and switch sides.
Then they might just flip back to the LDP if the LDP makes a slightly better or simpler offer.
Precisely. If rejecting the complex, possibly shaky anti-LDP deal is easy, low C, then forming an alternative LDP-inclusive coalition becomes much more likely and dynamically stable. The anti-LDP coalition falls apart before it even forms properly.
Okay, now I see the connection. Tamaki emphasizing these deep policy divisions on security, energy, the Constitution. He's effectively lowering the cost for his own party to reject Noda's offer.
That's the crucial insight from this model. By constantly highlighting these non-negotiable policy gaps with the CDP, Tamaki is making it politically easy and justifiable for the DPP to say no to the premiership offer from the opposition. He can argue, look, we'd love to change the government, but we simply cannot bridge these fundamental gaps with the CDP on issues vital to national survival. Therefore, cooperation with the LDP, where we have policy alignment, is the only responsible path to stable governance, even if they have other problems.
So the policy differences aren't just obstacles. They are Tamaki's leverage and also his potential exit ramp from the difficult opposition coalition. They lower the C value for rejecting Noda.
Exactly. It makes an LDP-PPJIP grouping look much more plausible and stable, according to this dynamic model, than a CDP-DPP-JIP grouping, purely because the policy friction, the fees cost of working with the CDP, is so high for the DPP, while the cost of working with the LDP on policy is relatively low.
Which puts Tamaki in an incredibly powerful, but also very precarious position. If he takes the PM job from Noda without resolving these policy issues, he's potentially leading a government doomed to collapse, just like he warned.
He risks fulfilling his own prophecy. The CDP might be hoping the sheer glamour of the Prime Minister's office will make him overlook the policy risks. But Tamaki seems to be playing a longer game, calculating based on stability and policy coherence, not just immediate power. His challenge is to use this leverage to extract maximum policy concessions, likely from the LDP, while maintaining the credibility of his centrist party.
So when you strip it all down, this whole intense drama in Tokyo really comes down to a fundamental clash of policy and history. Japan's political future seems balanced on a knife edge.
It really does. You have these two potential paths forward, and both require a major, painful shift from one side or the other.
Path 1. The LDP somehow repairs itself or transforms. What would that take?
For the LDP under Takaichi, they either need to fundamentally address the corruption issue, the slush funds, the lack of transparency seriously enough to maybe win Komeito back, which seems unlikely right now, or they have to accept that they are no longer the sole dominant force and make significant policy concessions to woo Tamaki's DPP and possibly the JAP, effectively creating a new, more conservative but less LDP-centric coalition.
That means Takaichi might have to moderate some of her own harder-line stances to accommodate the DPP.
Potentially, yes, or at least give the DPP significant influence over key ministries and policy areas where they align, like maybe defense or economic strategy.
Okay, that's the LDP's difficult choice.
Yeah.
What's path 2? The opposition uniting under Tamaki. What does that require?
That requires the main opposition party, the CDP, to essentially abandon core parts of its identity. They would have to radically shift their decades-long stance on national security, moving away from strict pacifism. They'd need to soften their anti-nuclear energy position. They'd have to drop their resistance to constitutional revision.
Policies that are absolutely central to their base and their history. It sounds like political self-immolation for the CDP.
It's hard to see how they could do it without alienating a huge chunk of their supporters and perhaps splintering their own party. It would be a monumental, perhaps impossible U-turn just for the chance of getting into power behind Tamaki.
And smack bang in the middle of these two unpalatable choices sits Yuichiro Tamaki.
Holding all the cards. His leverage isn't because his party is large or powerful in its own right. It's because the LDP suddenly lost its majority. And because the opposition is structurally divided by these deep ideological fault lines on core national policy. He's the indispensable bridge.
He's the only one who can connect the pieces for either side to form a government, thanks to those historical divisions resurfacing.
That's right. The Komeito split exposed the LDP's vulnerability, and the subsequent negotiations have thrown into sharp relief just how persistent those old 1955 system-era divides, especially around defense, and the constitutions still are in shaping Japan's political possibilities.
So this whole episode is a powerful reminder, really. In Japanese politics, winning an election or a leadership race is one thing.
But forging a stable coalition with enough policy agreement to actually govern effectively, especially when those historical ideological ghosts are rattling their chains, that's a whole different and much harder challenge. And right now, Tamaki is the gatekeeper to any potential solution.